Welcome in everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It's good to see some familiar faces. I feel like it's been a few less Zooms lately, which might be a gift for all of us, but it is nice to see people that we haven't seen around the club in a little while. My name's Colleen Curlin. I lead the programming for the Battery, and I'm really excited about tonight's talk, Digital Body Language, Building Trust No Matter the Distance. It is funny that we are doing this via Zoom, but I think it's a perfect conversation and a perfect forum for this. Obviously, we are in this new work from anywhere world, and some of you all might be feeling this both personally and as leaders of your teams, that there is a struggle to keep our teams and our loved ones from feeling connected and engaged. Employee frustration and miscommunication is at an all-time high, and I'm sure we feel that in our teams. Many of us are also grappling why it feels so much harder to foster trust and why our own virtual communications often seem to miss the mark. So tonight, we are joined by Erica Dhawan. In her new book, Digital Body Language, How to Build Trust and Connection No Matter the Distance, she introduces simple strategies to help both leaders and team members banish confusion and frustration to truly understand each other across the digital landscape. Just to say a bit more about Erica and Rashmi, our moderator. Erica Dhawan is a globally recognized leadership expert and keynote speaker, helping organizations and leaders innovate faster and further together. She has spoken worldwide to organizations and enterprises that range from World Economic Forum to global Fortune 500 companies. Named as one of the top management professionals around the globe, I lost my place, as one of the top management professionals around the world by global gurus. She's the founder of Cotential, a company that helps leaders and teams leverage 21st century collaboration skills globally. Her writing has appeared in dozens of publications, including Fast Company and Harvard Business Review. And our moderator for tonight is Rashmi Maria. She is a board leader and diversity, equity, and inclusion advisor, working with local and national organizations that focus on gender equity and education. She has an extensive experience working across public and private sectors and began her career in neuroscience research, working for a multinational pharmaceutical company in South Africa before shifting to mission-driven work. Most recently, she served as a board chair of a national political organization focused on empowering women to serve in elected and appointed political office. Before I hand it over to Rashmi, just a few housekeeping items. We're recording tonight's talk, and we will share it after tonight. Additionally, the chat is open, so please feel free to engage with one another and us throughout the talk. You can drop any thoughts or questions in there, and we'll be doing a Q&A towards the end of the hour with Erica. So Rashmi, with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Colleen. Erica, welcome. We're so excited to have you here because I think I speak for all of us when I say this has been a trial by fire situation, learning how to navigate in this digital landscape. And, you have so many amazing insights that we're going to get into just now. I thought we would start with how you became a collaboration and communication expert. Maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started on that journey.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Colleen. Thank you, Rashmi, for really hosting such a wonderful session for all of us tonight to really have a collective conversation about the new brave world that we are living in. And now as we move into a little bit about why and how I fell into really this work, I think it's really in many ways a lifelong story. I grew up as a shy and introverted girl in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My parents were Indian immigrants. So at home, we spoke Hindi, which meant at school, I had accented English. And I really struggled to find my voice in every classroom from kindergarten through 12th grade. I was often that kid getting straight A's, but every teacher wrote in my report card, I wish Erica spoke up more in class. One of the things, though, I was able to really develop because I was so observant was an ability to really decipher other people's body language. I would watch the popular girls with their heads high, the cool kids slouching during school assemblies. And it really helped taught me as I assimilated, really juggling different cultures and languages, that it's not about what we say, it's about how we say it. And in many ways, fast forward 30 years, I became a collaboration communication expert, helping companies, helping leaders really reimagine collaboration in 21st century workforces, global, virtual, remote, multi-generational matrix teams. But what I found, especially about 4 or 5 years ago, was many leaders kept asking the same questions like, why is there so much misunderstanding at work? Or how do we better connect across different ages and working styles? There's all these disconnects here. And what I found was that there was no rule book for the body of our language in a digital world. Just like I was an immigrant to traditional American body language as a kid, I realized that today we're all immigrants to this world of what I call digital body language, which is not about video skills. It's about the new cues and signals of how we make others feel and all the digital realms we live in, from emails to video calls to texts, you name it. So that's what really led me to this work. And I would definitely say, it was much more of a thread than a plan, but it has opened up a lot of new ways of thinking. And I'll also highlight, I started working on my new book, Digital Body Language, 4 years ago. So well before the pandemic, but it was adapted and finished during the pandemic. So you can imagine just even the widespread changes over the last 4 years in the research.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I feel like your book is coming at such an amazing time, because many of us have had now multiple moments of experimentation, and I bet every single person has experienced some kind of digital body language failure or mistake, So I'd love to talk about that in a minute, but could you frame for us the difference between what we think of as traditional body language, which I think many of us kind of have grown up learning about hand gestures and the physical gestures, like you don't want to cross your arms because it signifies you might be not very receptive. So many of us understand body language, but I don't think there's a wide understanding of what digital body language means. Could you help us understand that?
Yeah, and in many ways, we all know roughly 60 to 80% of the way we communicate in person is our nonverbal cues, pacing, pauses, gestures, tone, handshakes, lean-ins, and sales conversations, eye contact. This is what has really made up trust, empathy, connection for all of us for so much of our lives. But what's happened in a digital world is body language hasn't disappeared. It's just transformed into digital body language cues and signals. The challenge that I learned is many of us are using them blindly, accidentally, or often unintendedly wrong, because we haven't built that muscle. We are all immigrants to these new cues and signals. Now, let me give you some examples. And in my book, I actually have a checklist of like what, some trust signals in traditional body language may look like in digital body language. So let's start with trust. Now, we all know that there are traditional body cues of trust, whether it's direct eye contact, a lean in, open palms as a way to show that we care and we're connecting. Now, in a digital world, trust could be that quick email recap you send after a meeting. That's like the new virtual handshake, to make sure that everyone's on the same page and you feel like, oh, I was listened to, I was heard, we're aligned. Or that person that is on the Zoom call with you that can't share because there's 30 people, but is really engaged in the chat, not only saying I agree, but deepening the thinking and the conversation to create a new level of engagement. It can also be, simple things like moving from, especially for those that may be newer to digital body language, moving from the exclamation point to an emoji with maybe a younger team member, to deepen that level of intimacy, that we are now at a different level of how we engage and connect than in the past. Let's move to another example of body signals. One that I like is urgency. When we show urgency, we may raise our eyebrows. We may raise the tone of our voice, whether it's louder or higher. Now, in a digital world, urgency can be signaled through things like all caps messages, in text or email. It can also be signaled through sending multiple messages in different channels. Maybe you send an email, but you also say a text that says, did you get my email? And then you call them too within the same hour. And those are just examples to show that we have these parallels, but they look a little different in these different digital channels.
Great. That actually really helps, because one thing that you do in your book is you frame 4 laws of digital body language. And I thought we could just go through them. They are: value visibly, communicate carefully, collaborate confidently, and trust totally. So let's hit on the first one, value visibly. What do you mean? Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, we'll start with the first law. And I really frame these four laws because what I found is there is not just one perfect digital etiquette. Similar to traditional body languages that we all have across cultures, generations, genders, there's not one digital body language to follow. We have different languages. And the point is not to write emails in a certain way and to sign them off in a certain way. The point is to understand that we have these differences. But my goal with the book was to create a set of laws that could guide us all in groups, whether it's our families, our communities, our workplaces, that would allow us to create a sense of clarity across these differences. So the first law of digital body language is what I call value visibly. And when we think about valuing others visibly, we may traditionally think of all of the usual body cues we use to value others in a room: face-to-face eye contact, handshakes, lean in, stroking of a chin, a smile. Now, in the world of digital body language, I like to say valuing others visibly is no longer simply about those body cues. It's about valuing others' time, inboxes, and schedules. Valuing visibly is remembering that honoring people's time is the new art of respect, especially in our fast-paced world with email anxiety and Zoom fatigue at all-time highs. It's about three simple things. It's about someone who really has that sensitivity, that respect is shown in how you honor, value, and appreciate others and how you engage with them. So simple things like, as a leader, if you're running a Zoom call with a team, always starting with, here's what success looks like at the end of the meeting. Here's how I'm going to engage all of you in this meeting to participate. And if we all stay present, I'll end the meeting 10 minutes early. That will quickly avoid multitasking and get everyone to feel valued in their time. I can't say, that we still have way too many meetings that could be emails, and then we have emails that could be meetings. And valuing others visibly is having that sensitivity to those power trust dynamics and what is actually most appropriate for the group that you're with. The second key attribute, once you really value people by valuing their time, that's important in value visibly, is what I call acknowledging individual differences. So introverts may speak up differently from extroverts. I found that introverts, especially in a digital realm, have told me, I feel like I finally have a voice. When I was in an office, I was struggling for airtime and everyone had gregarious body language. Now I can share my idea in the chat and avoid turn taking, and it's avoiding groupthink and bias and allowing for collective input in a much more asynchronous, but in some ways even more synchronous and intentional way than was ever done in the past. I know leaders that are always sending agendas 48 hours before a meeting with specific questions. Then in the team meeting on video, they're asking all their team members to share answers in the chat first, and then calling on people with diverse perspectives. And this is just a great example of valuing your team fully visibly versus just having the 2 or 3 people who traditionally speak. And if we say, who wants to share on a call, we are much more likely to just get senior people or extroverts sharing. The third key attribute when it comes to valuing visibly is what I call practice radical recognition. Now, again, we have to remember what was implicit in traditional body language must be explicit in digital body language. If someone stayed up all night to work on a deliverable for us, and they come in the next morning in the office, they give it to us, they see the relief in our face, the smile, they see us give it to another colleague, they feel appreciated and valued. They know that we know how hard they worked. Now, if they just get an email response the next day saying K period or THX period, they don't truly feel valued. I like to say the THX period is like an acknowledgement you got someone's email. It's not a thank you anymore. So taking the time to really visibly value others, whether it's, shout outs, appreciation awards, simple things, clarifying in writing how much you appreciate others can really transform people's day, because technology can create those masks. So that's a quick summary of value visibly and why it matters in our digital world.
I think that's great, especially the radical notion of you must be very explicit with your appreciation, right? Because people can't tell. They don't have anything to reference in terms of your personal self. So,
yeah.
I bet many of us are guilty of just a quick thanks or THX. I'm not really understanding how that would be received.
Yes.
Sometimes we make assumptions about trust and relationship. You also bring up another amazing point, which is, I think because many people do have Zoom fatigue, we see some limitations with this technology, but you highlighted this really positive aspect of introverts, for example, being a group of people who have really been able to elevate their own voices through this medium that would not have been possible otherwise, or would be much more difficult. So it's really great that that's.
I'll share one more example of that. I'll never forget. Pre-pandemic, I was on a conference call. 3 of us were remote and 3 people were in the office. It wasn't until the 26th minute of a 30-minute meeting that someone in the office said, "Does anyone on the phone have something to share?" We had been excluded the entire time. Valuing visibly, especially as we navigate virtual, but also the future of hybrid work, is about really being thoughtful of geographic inclusion, avoiding that visual bias of just who's in headquarters or who's in the room. Even simple things like when you're running a hybrid meeting, having a remote host of the meeting and a live host in the room, and having them co-lead the meeting. Maybe the remote host leads the first half of the agenda to avoid that visual bias. Maybe you keep the use of the chat to avoid turn taking and have individuals share remotely. Maybe you make sure that breakout rooms don't just have those in the room, which creates bias and coffee chats in those remote, but actually split them up, have different cameras. So 2 people are remote, 2 people are in the room, are in a breakout. And these simple things, I think, were not questions we were asking prior to the pandemic, but because we've all felt perhaps not as valued visibly in a digital world, we can realign and move from this, concept of a new normal to what I call a better normal in valuing others moving forward.
Yeah. The other thing that you touched upon is law number 2, communicate carefully. I think that we are communicating carefully, but I bet that that's not always the case. So could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I'll share a story, that I share in the book, which is one of my clients sent a message to his boss that said, "Do you want to speak Wednesday or Thursday?" And his boss responds, "Yes." And I like to share that example because in our digital world, reading messages carefully is the new listening, and writing clearly is the new empathy. The ability to understand that our written messages carry a different level of weight in a digital world goes a long way. Remember, 60 to 80% of our body cues made up communication before. And with that removed, there's a different sensitivity to how we write and how we communicate carefully. And there's really 3 takeaways as I talk about communicate carefully. The first one is this idea that less haste equals more speed. As a leader in any profession or just in your community, you don't want to be the person that's rewarding the fastest person who responds, the quickest person who jumps in on a Zoom call. You want to prioritize thoughtfulness over hastiness. And whether that's using the chat tool intentionally, whether that's, I know a leader who says, "If you have another idea on a Monday morning meeting, send it to me on Friday." She forces her team to think for 4 days instead of just rushing out ideas, which we all know, I'm guilty of. And I think in many ways, it avoids that level of groupthink cultures that can happen. If 3 people say yes in an email, it's much harder for the 4th person to say, "No, I disagree, and here's why." But if we were all in a room synchronous and we saw for a browse or we saw someone stroking their chin, we knew that they might have a different opinion and we were ready to call on them. The second key attribute of communicate carefully is what I call choose maniacal clarity. So we have to remember that brevity can create a lot of confusion. I'll never forget one leader who was on a video call. She said something of the likes of, "Let's iterate on this topic a bit more." She was reviewing a deck from her team. And, her team took that as a work directive because she was more senior and created 10 more slides on the topic. They spent 40 hours on it. She was just looking for 2 more bullet points on one slide, but she didn't say that. She was brief, not clear. Imagine how demotivated they felt when it turned into 2 bullet points because she didn't communicate carefully. And the third thing that I think is important when it comes to communicate carefully is use the right channel. We have so many channels, whether it's Slack, phone, text, email, you name it, the other 15 other tools we have. And my general rule of thumb here is that good digital body language is not just adhering to the tool that someone sends us a message at, but really asking ourselves, what is the best tool to serve the work at hand? And there's really 3 factors that matter with the different channels. One is complexity. If it's high complex, maybe knowing a video or phone call is important. Low complex, choose Slack or email. Value people visibly by choosing the right channel. Secondly, urgency. Do you need it in 5 minutes or 5 days? And, a quick text, can actually be intrusive if it's not urgent. Whereas, something that truly is urgent may require that. And last but not least, familiarity. Is this someone you've known for 10 years or someone you've just met? And there are norms around, if someone you've just met, maybe you're working with their assistant to set up a formal call versus someone you can just ping automatically. And simply understanding those cues are important. And last but not least, I'll say when it comes to that, knowing that picking up the phone can be worth 1,000 emails is also important. I believe there's a lost art to phone calls that I hope we can bring back.
Yeah. Erica, could you just delve a little bit deeper into the right medium for the right communication? So let's take, for example, email versus text, because one thing you get into with your book as well is there can be generational differences in terms of how people are interpreting those texts and those emails. And we all grew up either as a digital native or as a digital adapter. I'm totally using your language from your book. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So, what I found, I looked at, differences in digital body language across a couple spheres, one being gender, one being cross-cultural globally, and the third was generational differences. And what I found is, as we all know, not all millennials are the same, not all baby boomers, not all Xers are the same. But what was unique was there was a spectrum. There were those that definitely classified more as digital body language natives. And the other end of the spectrum were those that really saw themselves as digital body language adapters. So you could see them as the truest immigrants to virtual ways of working. A digital body language native is someone who was really steeped in the conventions of digital body language. They grew up with it often, but they're not all just young people. I know 50-year-olds that are digital natives. And they really prefer text, IM, virtual chat tools. They hate voicemails. They hate phone calls out of the blue. They expect actually structuring them. They like frequent shorter messages. And they'll opt for sending that quick email or that text versus setting up that phone call or deep dive discussion. They're digital body language first, not traditional body language first. The other end of the spectrum are digital adapters. These are individuals that can't wait to get back to the office. They prefer those phone calls, those video meetings. They have more reluctance with new technology, tend to have longer messages. I'll give you an example. I know a digital native that will send a thoughtful, detailed email of questions to the adapter boss, and the adapter will say, let's get on the phone to discuss. And the native will feel like, why can't you just answer my email so I can get back to work? And the adapter will think, why can't you just pick up the phone so I can get back to work? And it just goes to show that there are differences across these styles. Now, when it comes to different channels, this often creates different preferences around channels. Whereas text or IM may be preferred for a digital body language native, a digital adapter will really be, prefer more formality in email, in a video call. And I think this is a moment for really cross learning around this, because I think the answer isn't an either or. It's about what medium will best serve the task at hand, versus just adapting to people's preferences. So if you work for someone who's a serial texter, they may not be doing the best job of creating a good culture, in a virtual world, especially based on these differences, or someone who's a serial video caller when we know screen fatigue is a real thing. And so my general rule of thumb here is this is a great moment to set some collaboration norms in whatever group or community that you're working within, to really define the places and spaces when we email, when we text, what are the response time expectations and how we use them as well. And even simple things like if you want to have a meeting, phone or video, you send a calendar invite with a clear purpose, agenda with all the right people invited, and even just forcing people to craft the art of a good meeting title and a clear agenda. And I know at cultures like Amazon, if you don't have an agenda, they are encouraged to not accept your meeting. If we force some of this, I actually think it's good for all of us. A quick phone call may be different, but we have to really define and bring purpose back to these different ways of engaging. And I think that will bring all of us sanity back to very much a burnt out culture we're all experiencing.
Yeah, I think you bring up an amazing point, which is on some level, I think we're just kind of rapidly using, like we're just firing off a quick email, firing off a quick text, and not always being very deliberate, thoughtful. We need to slow down, is what I'm hearing you say,
Yeah.
and really think about the purpose of what you are trying to say and then deciding for the task what is the right medium to use. So that's
Yes.
such a reminder that we all need to slow down a little bit.
And assume good intent when someone may send something in the wrong way, and use your opportunity. Good digital body language is knowing when to switch. I've had way too many reply all emails. After 3, my rule, I pick up the phone, or there is actually a study that showed if you put a period at the end of a text, digital natives may think that means passive aggressiveness because they grew up using the period at the end of informal text channels like an AOL Instant Messenger to show resentment or frustration. Whereas a digital adapter is just think of it as good grammar, the end of a sentence like email. They didn't grow up with those conventions. And so there can even be differences across simple punctuation marks in a virtual world.
Yeah, wow. I clearly am an adapter because I always have good punctuation because I really take seriously my punctuation, but that was drilled into me from a young age. Let's just pause for a moment. And I just want to talk to everyone who's on the call. We would love to get your participation in the chat. So please start thinking about your questions for Erica because we're going to have time in a short while for you to ask your questions. So please put those in the chat. And then also Erica and I were talking about how it would be fun to hear what are your digital pet peeves? Just put them in the chat so we can
digital pet peeves. Yes, and we'd love to hear from everyone. So maybe if you can think of what has been your biggest challenge or top digital pet peeve and share them. And my goal is to really bring potentially some best practices for navigating those. So maybe we'd love to hear from Sherry and Annette and Rachel and Lydia and Kelly and Monica, Trevor, AJ. I think it goes a long way just to get some of your collective input.
I really like how Sherry wrote, reply all and be thoughtful about who actually needs the reply. That is the truth, Sherry.
Absolutely. I know teams that are setting acronyms now, and I have a whole acronym list in the book. One of them is NNTR, which means no need to respond. And that simple acronym at a company, Merck, is just reducing a lot of email overwhelm, where people feel this pressure to reply all, when it's actually just wasting and clogging people's inboxes. And so I think a big notion of this is a lot of the ways, because of the loss of body language, we feel we have to engage is by replying all. But in fact, making it explicit that it can be a waste of time and more effective to not, or clarifying when it's not needed is important. The other one I often get is when do we need to be on video and when not? And I like to say it's the job of the host to make it clear. Even in your meeting calendar invite, clarify, we want everyone on video. If you can't be on video, let me know beforehand. This shouldn't create the opt-in, it creates the opt-out. Or, to avoid screen fatigue, if there's a presentation, be on video the first 5 minutes and the last 10 minutes to avoid that screen fatigue during a live presentation where no one's actually looking at the camera anyway. So those are just some examples.
I see another pet peeve, which says people not acknowledging email messages or not thoroughly reading an email by Simone. So I think that we can identify with that one too.
I think a lot of us, I'm guilty of this too. It's easy to read through a message and rush through it and then respond without even answering the question or ruminating around one line of something and then assuming someone's angry or being rude when they were actually just typing fast. And I think we have to remember that technology has masks around it. And so a simple tip there is to remember that your emails are visual. People read them like websites. Be thoughtful of your subject line, the body, have bold and underlined headings. I know one team that has another acronym that's called WINFI, which means what I need from you. And at the top of their emails, they put WINFI and they clarify what they need, and then they go into the text. And it just changes the speed of effectiveness in the written communication.
Well, I promise you that we're going to get to some of the other questions and topics that people want to talk about, but I think we would be remiss to not quickly go through the 2 other laws. We can do it kind of briefly, Erica. Maybe let's get into collaborate confidently. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, and I'll try to start to answer some of the questions as we think about the final 2 laws. So the 3rd law is collaborate confidently, which is really about the fact that building confidence with others today is not just about our gregarious body language or having a team dinner or networking in a happy hour anymore. It's about saying what you'll do, doing what you'll say. It's about creating that culture of consistency in our communication cadence. It's about prioritizing thoughtfulness over hastiness in building that sense of presence. I'll give you some examples of what collaborating confidently can look like. And I'll tie it into who had a great question about client prospect digital etiquette. One of the things that I've found that sort of ties into collaborating confidently is to think about what have we innovated around in digital work and digital sales that will allow us to build more confidence with others. So one example, I'll give two examples here. The first one is one leader who ran town halls with his team. Pre-pandemic, he would go onto a screen, in headquarters live with an audience. He would read a corporate communications script using his rah-rah body language and then leave. And he thought everything worked out. If he tried to do that on a screen, reading a script, which is obvious, we know when people are reading on Zoom, it just fell flat. People were insulted last March and April when he was doing this. So what we did is we thought about how could we build that culture of confidence? We completely flipped the script. Now what he does is he sends a video update 48 hours or a week in advance of the town hall. He has everyone watch it. Then during the meeting, he has a live Ask Me Anything format virtually, where employees all around the world are asking him questions in real time. He's answering them in a vulnerable way, no corporate script. They have individuals coming in on video screens to ask questions. He's recognizing not only birthdays, but great work being done, cross-functional collaboration in a way that was never done pre-pandemic. And he's told me, he said, I never want to go back to the way it was because it actually wasn't as effective the way it was. And it's just an example to show that collaborating confidently is really asking ourselves, how will we not revert? How will we transform? The fourth and final law I want to share is what I call trust totally. And trust totally is really the integration of value visibly, communicate carefully, and collaborate confidently. It's about that full 360 engagement of trust, regardless of distance. And at the end of the day, it's about being willing to create that level of psychological safety. On one end, it's about creating those virtual or hybrid water cooler moments, and many of you have innovated around this in the last year. It's about creating psychological safety in vulnerable discussions. I know leaders that in team meetings are having team members share a win of the week, a challenge in group meetings at the beginning of every meeting to actually break the ice in the first 5% of the meeting, which research shows if everyone is speaking in the first 5% of the meeting, they're much more likely to share for the rest of the 95%. But if you just have one person or three people speaking, especially in those first 10 minutes, most of the time, they speak for the rest of the time. It sets the intention. And I know another leader who in her one-on-ones always asks her team members one question: what's a piece of bad news I don't want to hear? To actually design for psychological safety in a discussion, to not assume it will come up issues, but actually ask for it in a very careful and intentional way. I'll give you one final example of trust in a digital world, and it goes back to whose question around client prospects. I've seen sales teams now in digital sales with prospects in a virtual setting. They are zooming in an existing client to talk to a prospect client for 5 minutes about how much they love their service or product. And then they're zooming out. And then, they continue the sales conversation. Now think about that. This would never happen in the traditional coffee sales conversation in person, but the ability to redesign what can we send before that virtual meeting? Who can we infuse? Anyone, anywhere during that meeting? And what can we do after that meeting? Even that simple quick email recap within 30 minutes as the virtual handshake are things that were not always happening in the past, but actually can allow us to deepen trust moving forward. So I'm going to pause there. I've been talking a lot and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'll bring it back to you, Rashmi.
Thanks. I think we have some great questions popping up in the chat. And I think what I'm going to welcome people to do, because we're such a, amazing group of people who would like to add voice, I'm going to ask people to unmute when I kind of read your question. Does that make sense? Or maybe you can add to the question that's been typed. So this is from, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Aniki. And the question is, curious about science data studies around connecting certain digital body language signals to business results. And do you want to add to your question at all, Aniki? And if you do, please unmute and please correct me if I'm not saying your name correctly.
Thanks. It's Annika, actually. It's Dutch. You were very close.
Apologies.
Yes, I'm especially interested in revenue results And both on the seller side and on the buyer's side, whether there's something we can learn to connect digital body language signals to whether a connection is being made, engagement is there, the sale is on the right track, the buyer is being heard, that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, great question, and I'll share what I know from the academic studies, but I also think that this is a new frontier to actually really deep dive into. Now, what I have seen in studies that I've run is the direct link between effective digital body language signals and productivity in workforces. In fact, I ran a study with a research firm, Quester, this past year, thousands of office workers, and we found that the average employee was wasting up to 4 hours a week on poor, unclear, or confusing digital communications. So if you quantify that to the loss of productivity and the impact on sales, you could probably reverse engineer. But when it comes to actually digital communication to sales results, what I have seen is that studies have shown that salespeople with stronger and deeper digital networks within their own organizations, and that was often found through higher quality and diverse levels of email communication with different types of people within their organization, actually led to better sales results externally. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that being an effective salesperson is not just the one-to-client relationship. It's about a salesperson being able to have deep relationships within their own organization, across silos, across business functions, with services, with other feedback loops to make sure that there's effective upselling and cross-selling as well. And so, in terms of what I've seen from signals to the buyer, I have not seen studies around that. I think it's a great frontier to actually, if you're running a sales team, to actually look at some of the cues and signals that's making or breaking relationships. It'd be interesting to look at even Microsoft Outlook data around this. A lot of clients are very sensitive about emails they send to their clients, and they haven't shared them. But I think being able to analyze some of that would allow us all to decode some of the signals that grow sales within organizations. Was that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We have another question from Julia, and Julia is asking, how do you recommend encouraging team members to be fully present during a Zoom call when it's so easy to multitask? So Julia, would you like to, and feel free to not, but I want to invite you to unmute if you'd like to add on to your question or to.
Sure. Yeah. My question, I just catch team members doing it, but also myself doing it, because you're staring at your screen and you've got other things to do. And then sometimes you'll ask a question during a call and realize someone wasn't even paying attention to what the conversation was. So I was just curious if there's any tips in how to kind of bring everyone to be present when it's so easy to be distracted anyway while on screen.
Yeah. So I'll be honest, there's no silver bullet here. It is much harder to stay present. Multitasking is at all-time highs. Again, I think a lot of creating good presence and creating a space where everyone is present really goes back to defining a clear purpose around why everyone's in the room, how they will contribute, what are the expectations and norms around how we design the meeting to foster that presence versus defaulting to assuming everyone will be present. And in many ways, I like to use the analogy of, I think if we're running meetings, we have to think less like office hosts and more like TV show hosts. Now, a TV show host has always had to think about how to keep people present from a screen. They design an agenda, a segment well before the actual live segment, with a clear agenda, what they're going to discuss with common themes. In the actual live show, they bring in people in different segments. They call on people at random. They set up what they're going to discuss up front. They summarize what they heard. They bring in other themes. In almost like a debate, they're not afraid or shy of calling on people at random or forcing an order or cutting people off, and to make sure that everyone is part of the discussion. And in many ways, I think in some cultures that some of those actually ideas could work very well. In other cultures, it may be harder. But simply thinking about setting norms or even doing a bit of an audit with your team to talk frankly about, how present have we been? Where are the times and moments where we haven't been as present? And where are the times and moments when we have been most present? And using that audit as a way to reverse engineer what are the norms we want to keep moving forward. I've seen teams actually have a slide they put up, or it's in the meeting calendar invite of norms to remind everyone before the meeting, or even just in 30 seconds reminding people at the beginning of the meeting, whether it's we'll call on people at random. Here's the agenda at the beginning that we'd like you to engage in. We'll use the chat tool or a mural whiteboard to make sure every single one of you are engaging. And we'll end 10 minutes early so that you can catch up on email and follow up. I've seen teams start 5 minutes late. So they'll go at the 05 to the 30 of the hour as a way, because a lot of meetings end up running late otherwise. And so those are just some examples for you, but I think the TV show host model is a way that we actually just shouldn't be shy of taking our power back in these video meetings. Just don't allow, there's obviously multitasking, but the more that we can make it, sort of acknowledge that it's not okay, the more people will sort of improve their behaviors around it. And last but not least, there's a lot of times where people feel forced to stay in meetings that they don't need to be in anymore. So I recommend things like the Zoom BCC. If someone doesn't need to be in a meeting anymore, write in the chat, BCC, Julia and Colleen, and they can just drop off. They don't have this awkward goodbye. That's actually valuing them and valuing their time. And it will make people avoid that multitasking as well if they know that there's a point they can drop off. I'll pause there just to see any of your reactions.
Well, Sherry is asking also another question as it relates to engagement. And she's asking thoughts on breakout rooms. Could you please share your thoughts on those? And if you think that helps with participation. Sherry, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that's just it. I mean, I think you guys have talked a lot about how to engage that whole TV host piece. And I think sometimes people might feel a little overwhelmed being around a lot of people. So one thought that I had, which I haven't tested yet, would be to see how people did in smaller groups. And if that would maybe start a little bit of confidence.
Yeah.
Around being on Zoom. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question and comment, Sherry. I find that breakout rooms are very effective, especially if you have, usually more than 10 people on a call, even more than 8 people, sometimes 4 groups of 2 to have smaller discussions and then come to a larger group can be effective. It's useful for 3 reasons. One is introverts have more of a safe space to speak up if they're not chatty on the chat. Extroverts feel like they can share their voice in a way that doesn't take up all the airtime in a meeting. Secondly, breakout groups can be very effective when it comes to removing a lot of the bias that shows up in traditional body language. So in a face-to-face meeting, we tend to break out or sit next to people that look like us, that are similar ages, that are similar genders or cultures. So you'll see the older people sitting together that have known each other for 10 years, the newbies in the corner together. And actually, when we get to breakouts, we're so biased in who we're connecting with. I love the power of randomized breakouts so that we're actually breaking a lot of those biases in sidebar conversations as well. And so I'd encourage them, actually, especially as you move back to hybrid work, to sustain some of those randomized breakouts versus just who's in the room and who are you sitting next to. And the last thing is, in hybrid work also, I think having breakouts that are remote and live people, maybe you have multiple screens in a room, is actually going to be really important to remove that remote bias of just the remote people getting together and the live bias of just sidebar conversations in a room.
That's great. I also want to highlight what JD has brought up, because he's almost asking you for your secret sauce, Erica. He's saying, how do you do what you're doing now, engaging so fully and seemingly authentically with a room that's primarily not engaging back with you? I mean, you are, gesturing with your hands, and your voice is, full of life, and it's pretty, amazing. So I know you're a professional, but JD, you can ask more about that, but I thought that was a great question. I would also like to know the answer to that.
I'll acknowledge it's self-interested because I also teach online, and this morning I had like 45 people all over the world and no one had their camera on, and I'm just talking alone in my closet.
Like most of you at the beginning of this meeting.
And so what are some of the ways you're awesome with the eye contact directly with the camera lens, which I think is awesome. But what else do you do that lets you bring the energy when you're not getting it back from the people in the Zoom room?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, it's hard again, and there's not a perfect win here. You can tell I'm passionate about the topic of digital body language. And I think that ideally comes through on camera. You know, research shows we make eye contact 30 to 60% of the time face to face. When I think about myself presenting, I want to be making eye contact 60 to 70% of a presentation. I also am trying to look at the chat too from time to time. And if it's a gallery view, obviously looking and reading other people's body language, but more when they're speaking. If we make direct eye contact, research shows virtually, it creates a better authentic sense that I sense and I show empathy to you. If I'm looking at you, which means I'm looking in the camera, not actually looking at you. And one quick tip there is there's actually a tool you can use called PlexiCam, which is a camera you can put in the middle of your screen. And so if you look down at Zoom at someone, so JD, if I'm looking at you, it actually looks like I'm looking at you to you as well. So that's just a quick hack for anyone that's thinking about that. The second thing is when I'm presenting to larger groups, I really try to actively use the chat. And I want to thank Rashmi for getting us to start to use the chat. It does create that engagement. I've been doing hybrid events. I've been in big ballrooms with a live group and a virtual chat. I find that, you know, when I start the Q&A, no one in the room is ready to ask a question. They're all still like pondering. In the virtual chat, there's like 10 questions already lined up. And so in some ways, I'm really feeding off of that virtual communication in a way that's sometimes better than in person. And last but not least, take breaks. Know when you need space off the camera to get back on, and don't be shy to call on people. Like, you know, Rashmi's been really designing this for engagement, but I named some of you before. I said some of your names, and then I started to see some of your comments in the chat. It kind of sped up engagement. And in many ways, I'll do that in a discussion or call on people at random, which I think it is not uncomfortable. It's actually a sign of, you know, we want to hear from you and we value you. So those are just some quick tips for everyone.
Just a very quick follow-up. What's on your screen right now? Are you seeing yourself? Are you seeing those of us who have our cameras on? Are you seeing all of us? Are you seeing none of us? What are you looking at as you talk?
So right now, I'm seeing most of you in small bubbles on video, and the person who's speaking, so you, JD. But I've done, you know, 1,000-person events where I'm seeing nothing but my slides and a picture of me, which is, let's be honest, it's hard and terrible. And I can't even see the chat sometimes. And, you know, there's definitely moments where I feel like, did anyone care? Was this even good? And I have to go back to reminding myself to use those Q&A moments to get that feedback and get that feedback afterwards. Because let's be honest, it is harder. But if you sort of think of yourself more like a TV show host, which I try to do, I reframe my mind around it and I stop worrying about what people think and really design it more to make sure we're getting the right messages across. The last thing I'll share on that is, you know, digital body language is not just about our video backgrounds, but they do help. You know, if you have a clean background, if you have some good lighting, if you haven't invested in like a $50 webcam and some good lighting, do it now. Like, this is the moment. Don't waste any time. Don't have a screen where we're looking down at you, where we're looking at your forehead. We're not seeing you eye level, and make sure you're far away enough where people can see your hand gestures, not just your face.
Thank you, Erica, for that. I'm just being mindful of time because we have more questions rolling in. Really great question as well from Simone, asking any suggestions or on how you would basically handle conflict resolution in the virtual workplace. And Simone, I want to invite you also to unmute and add on to that if you'd like to.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Erica. I've really been enjoying this so far. Looking through and like taking notes and hearing all of your tips, it's definitely resonated with me a little bit as well on just, building trust and figuring out how to best collaborate and communicate with your colleagues who you rarely get to see, and you're working on projects together, or you're new to a team, or someone new joins the team and you've never been able to meet them, and just wondering if you have any extra tips and insights or any use cases around what works best from what you've provided so far in those.
Yeah, a couple of key things, and we can open it up. Anyone else that has a best practice or a hack around, complex or nuanced discussions virtually, you can share it in the chat also. I think it starts with using the right channel. A lot of this is just much better on video and definitely phone than written, because tone can get lost. And we tend to sort of have the compliment sandwich in virtual communications to not seem too harsh. We'll say good work, but here's what we need to fix, when it's actually really bad. And there needs to be some alignment to check in on where we are, on where work stands. So really setting it up on video is what I recommend. Asking for permission, like really sharing, can I share some feedback? Or I'd like to have a discussion, with you about X, to sort of set people up for it versus just individuals feeling off guard in the discussion. Creating a coaching mindset around it, especially virtually. So here's the situation, here's the complication, here's what needs improvement. What do you think would really work best to improve this? Giving others a way to share their feedback. Radical Candor is often a great book to go to on this. And I think those practices match virtually, just like they do face-to-face. And last but not least, making sure there's a clear follow-up. Sometimes it's a quick follow-up email to make sure you're aligned. Sometimes it's an agreement. Let's check in 1 month on a quick Zoom call. But that digital follow-up is actually just as important as that conversation to make sure that discussion is sustained. You also brought up, we're almost out of time, but you brought up something of new people, new employees coming in. And a lot of them are struggling with learning the culture virtually. But I really provoke all of us to think about, how can you use digital shifts to help your team members understand your culture much quicker? I'll give you examples. I know teams that are recording calls of team meetings and having onboarding employees watch those recordings to understand, how do we run meetings? What are the norms of our culture? Listening in on meetings they never would have been part of in the office, that they can actually be part of now in, off video with a client. And even simple things like having peer virtual communities of those that are onboarding together to share expertise and best practices versus just a training for a few days and then off to your team, breaking those silos as well as a peer group.
Thank you. Those are all great. Thanks so much.
I think we have time for the last couple of questions, and I think we could keep going, but Hugh is asking, is hand gesturing a distraction and a no-no, or how do we hand gesture while we're in the virtual space? And I think that should be the last question, even though we could keep going, but let's end with that one.
Yeah, we'll answer that. Before I even do that, I just want to give a shout out to all of you that are in the chat sharing. Trevor just told us he was driving and he stopped to share that he's valued the conversation. That really means a lot. That's a great example of valuing all of us visibly, who, yes, I'm absolutely available to speak at your company, to bring these best practices. I have training programs all around it. And the last question when it comes to hand gestures is, I actually think they are helpful, but you want to use them effectively. I was actually on the Today Show about 2 months ago analyzing a Zoom meeting of employees, and hand gestures are effective when they build confidence. So certain hand gestures like an up down often is much more confident. But if you're using hand gestures like this, you can feel a bit scattered or insecure in your comments. And so knowing how to use them well to signal excitement or definitiveness makes them effective, but also being conscious when they can be distracting is important. And just get feedback from people that you trust. How am I coming across? How's my digital body language with you? Is a great way to get that peer-to-peer learning as well. I know we're almost at the hour, but I really want to thank you, Rashmi, and all of you for engaging, and Colleen for having me. I hope that if you enjoyed this session, you'll check out my new book, Digital Body Language. It made the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. But in many ways, I feel like it's cascaded a lot of larger organizations, but I really want to get it all over the tech scene in San Francisco and beyond. So I hope you'll check it out. I hope you'll gift it to your employees, buy it for your spouses, can even navigate, husband-wife scenarios around digital texting, and really think about how you can use these principles moving forward as we navigate digital and hybrid work.
Thank you, Erica. I am just going to attest that I read the book cover to cover, and I don't think there's one person who wouldn't benefit from this book because we are in uncharted territory. Some of us think we're doing it really well, and I bet other people in our life would say, in fact, you could improve a lot. So there's just so many amazing tips and tricks that you have pointed out in the book, as well as tonight. And this is being recorded, so please feel free to watch it again, and please just a big, if we could all just do some appreciation for Erica on the screen with like a hand clap or a thumbs up or something, give her some love so she can feel it through the screen. It's evening where she lives, and she's really gracious in spending her time with us. So Erica, when you're in San Francisco next and you're in the Battery and all of these people come and walk up to you and say, Erica, I went to your digital body language talk and I'm gonna buy you a drink at the bar. We just can't wait for that moment when we can see you in person in the club. So until then, much success, take care, and your work is fabulous and much needed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rashmi. Thank you, everyone.